Although it hasn't been 27 years, for me it feels like a lifetime ago since I watched and reviewed Andy Muschietti's adaptation of It, the epic novel by Stephen King, which has since been renamed Chapter 1. It's one of my earliest reviews and it shows, but 2 years later, I know I've changed a lot in how I approach these videos. For instance, I can now pronounce Muschietti. In 2016, the year we'd all like to forget, 27 years after their first encounter with the demon clown, the Losers Club reunite to defeat it once and for all. The grown-up characters all look the part. James McAvoy, Bill Hader, Jessica Chastain, Jay Ryan from Neighbours, your man from the Old Spice ads Isaiah Mustafa, James Ranson and Auntie Bean. Particular praise goes to the casting of Hader and Chastain, who were suggested by their younger selves Finn Wolfhard and Sophia Lillis. This is one advantage the film has over the miniseries, where I always felt there was a big disconnect between the older and younger versions of the characters. The disadvantages of this new film, well, I'm afraid to say there are a good few. Spoilers to follow if you are unfamiliar with the text or have yet to see the film. Although the 2017 film was a really strong adaptation, it was bound to be, as it took the elements of the book that resonated the most with audiences and sensibly got rid of the insane and obscene moments found in King's original work. You know, the stuff that people criticise for good reason. Chapter 2, on the other hand, has to adapt the parts of the book that don't click that much with readers or the audience. And I can see the struggle to make something out of it. Don't get me wrong, the film had a lot of potential to be better than the source material, but Chapter 2 isn't. I had hoped that Mike would get more time in the film as he wasn't given as much focus as the others, much like Stan Uris in the first film. And I give the team credit that they kept him in the big final battle between Pennywise and the Losers, unlike the book in the 1991 that has him in hospital after the grown-up Henry Bowers attacks him, and he's still the one to bring them back to Derry, Maine. Not to be confused with Derry in Northern Ireland. But as far as I remember, he isn't in it much either, and that's a shame. But neither is James McAvoy, come to think of it. You'd think the leader of the Losers would be in a good chunk of the film, as his younger self was when it was set in 1989, and considering the big star they have playing him, who's no strange to horror thanks to Shyamalan's Split, but outside of a few scenes, one of which finds him returning to the drain where Georgie was murdered by Pennywise, he's not really there. As with 90-something% of King characters, the movie portrays him as a writer who gets lambasted for his disappointing endings by everyone, including Stephen King himself at one point. That was a crazy cameo. It's funny at first, but it gets old fast, and the expressions practice what you preach and pot calling the kettle black spring to mind. Older Ben's there. Jay Ryan's fine in the role, but he didn't get a lot of time either. At this point in his career, he's not as recognisable as someone like the late John Ritter would have been back in the early 90s, which could be the reason why. However, I thought Jessica Chastain put in a good performance. The standout actor, as everyone on the internet has been saying, is Bill Hader as the older Richie Tozier. I don't know if it's Oscar-worthy like some have articulated, but for his first ever horror movie, his performance is pretty strong. He gets the funniest lines and the best scenes, one of my favourites being the reprisal of the Three Doors towards the end of the film. And the development of his character as a gay man yet to come out of the closet was an interesting but welcome addition to the film. Chapter 2 also reveals Richie had feelings for Eddie, which make his reaction to the character's death pretty heartbreaking. His final scene in the film is bittersweet too, I won't give that away. The story may end here, but you hope Richie will live his life unafraid and comfortable in who he is. It also seems to be quite popular with the shipping culture of fandom. Among the praise and love for Richie in the film, there are articles online about the representation falling short. Having read them, I understand completely if you feel the filmmakers could have done better. We've come a long way, but media still has a long way to go. Jay Ranson as Eddie was great too. He bounces off Hader just as well as the younger selves did in Chapter 1. As an adult, he meets the leper again and almost destroys him, only for it to puke in his face. That's already a gross thing to happen in the film, but what's mind-boggling about that moment is their decision to play a portion of the song Angel of the Morning by Juice Newton over the projectile vomiting. Was it meant to be funny? What was the point of that? It completely takes you out of the scene. They also follow through with Stan's demise in the film, as well as Casbrack's. They tried to turn it around by the end by giving him the last words, which I don't think was a bad idea, but that's another thing I've seen critique being thrown at. Another strange bit of humour they chose to add in was the moment from the miniseries where Stan's head is in the fridge. In this version, his head rolls out and turns into a monster reminiscent of one of the creatures from John Carpenter's The Thing, which is also one of my earliest reviews. Richie even quotes the film. The actor who played Stan in the miniseries was also in the film, but if you didn't know that, you'd think it was paying homage or straight up plagiarism. There's another scene as well where it takes the form of Beverly's childhood tormentors, including her creepy father and Henry Bowers. They're banging on this door trying to get in at her, and Henry shouts, "Here's Johnny!" which I don't know how to feel about. On the one hand, it's a King adaptation, and if you're doing a scene similar to a moment in the the most famous King film, The Temptation is Irresistible, but on the other, I don't think you needed to. And I doubt King would have approved considering how he personally feels about Kubrick's vision. Another problem with the film is that it's all over the place. The scene with Mrs. Kirsch starts off really well and suitably creepy. That stare especially will give you nightmares. She ends up bollock naked, which made a good few burst out laughing in the cinema I saw this at. And then she turns into this weird golem looking thing. Unlike the first film with the woman in the painting and the leper, it's not as effective. There are a few interesting flashbacks. As per King's desire to have this in the film, they adapted the Paul Bunyan manifestation into a scene with Richie, and they have a scene where Ben gets chased by a nightmarish version of Beverly. There's a really obvious jump scare in this scene, but to be honest, the dimly lit poster of Danny from New Kids on the Block was much more freaky than Pennywise showing up. They happen one after another as opposed to being spaced out more compared to something in the first film, which means you get used to them too quickly. They already trimmed the dead weight off the film by reducing the subplots of Beverly's abusive husband Tom Rogan and Bill's wife Audra to cameos, so why not these? They've also stuck to the return of Henry Bowers, now played by Teach Grant, which didn't sit right with me. I thought that his fall down the well in the last one was a pretty definitive end to his character in the movies. Apparently not this time. They also bend the rules regarding its powers. It appears as a rotting zombie of Patrick Hockstetter, then somehow drives him around and drops him off wherever the plot requires him to be. Bowers in the movie is just a distraction with not that many lines and a shitty end to a horrible bully. I also feel the special effects are more obvious in this one. The CGI wasn't overused, so you wouldn't always see how obvious they were, but in Chapter 2, you can tell they're not in the same frame as the cast. When I saw it in the cinema, I didn't mind their final battle with Pennywise. In fact, I applauded the creativity and insanity. Beverly's alone holds the record for most fake blood used on a set, but now that I think of it, there might be too much going on. Be warned if you plan on watching the movie though, because there is a lot of strobing and could be harmful if you've got photosensitive epilepsy. Like, for all their deviations from the source material, the climax of the book and miniseries has always been the part of the story that everyone agrees falls on its arse. This is the part everyone will welcome a different take on. It's not a badly realised animatronic. It's kind of a compromise. Most of it is Bill Skarsgård, so you still have the villain facing our heroes, which the miniseries doesn't, and half of him is an oversized spider. In one way, it's an improvement because there's a massive disconnect going from the scene-stealing Tim Curry to the obvious, but it reminds you of a mediocre horror video game cutscene effects-wise. It still doesn't work. Maybe the ending of the novel just doesn't translate. They get rid of Pennywise by making him small. They take out his heart and crush it, which happened in the book, and that's the end of it. Compared to the teamwork and beating the shit out of the clown in Chapter 1, this is a disappointment. Also, the image of a really tiny Pennywise with googly eyes and a sagging head is hilarious. I wonder whether the gang had straight faces watching that at the premiere. I didn't. Some scenes I thought were effective in the film, and I respect Muschietti and the people involved for them. Chinese restaurant gags were effective enough, and I laughed at Mike bashing the table with a chair saying, "It's not real!" That was very hypocritical. As many critics have mentioned, the Funhouse or Hall of Mirrors moment is well put together and a really dark moment that twists the knife into Bill's guilt over Georgie's death. It might be McAvoy's best moment in the film. Going off on a tangent, it's crazy to think that the Sarah Jane Adventures did something similar to this back in 2008. Well, if it's inspired by it, I guess it's quid pro quo. One moment that I don't think has gotten enough recognition in how disconcerting it is the scene with Pennywise and Vicky, the girl with the birthmark on her face. It reminds you of the opening with Georgie as well as the opening in the miniseries. This scene is one or two in the film, the other being the hate crime against Adrian Mellon, which has been carried over from the book, that I find particularly hard to watch. But that moment was inspired by a real-life crime committed in Maine. The truth is sometimes more terrifying than fiction. The scene under the bleachers, meanwhile, taps into the very real parental fear of your child being lured away by strangers. And since you know full well what this film is like, you're dreading what happens to the girl. And since I haven't talked about him as much in this video, I'll still give Bill Skarsgård a lot of praise as It, or Pennywise. It mightn't be the best script in the world, nor is he on screen as much as he was 2 years ago, which I know some people have written about, but he's still giving it everything. You see him as the human version. He puts on white face paint and scratches his face into his trademark smile. It's very chilling stuff. A great performance. I'll also give them credit for not doing the whole maturing the turtle that created the universe stuff and calling out the ritual of Chud as total shite, because that was never going to work on screen. It would have made for a much weirder film, but I think you would have lost people doing that. It Chapter 2 is fine for what it is and much better than I thought it was going to be, but it also proves that lightning doesn't strike twice, nor do Stephen King stories always translate well to the big screen. Chapter 1 got a 9 out of 10 from me. Chapter 2, I'm sorry to say, gets a 6.